My name is Jennifer Wilson. I'm the Senior Curator of Transport here at the Workshops Rail Museum. Welcome today. Now we have quite a number of people and vehicles that are part of the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, Queensland branch, and we're very grateful for their support. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to give John Murray here a chance to tell you about that and give us some insights into electric vehicles, especially in Queensland. So hand over to John, and thanks for speaking today.
Thanks, Jennifer. And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me half an hour or so of your time. I guess I'd just like to say, first and foremost, I'm not an expert in this field, but I've got some experience. I've had an electric vehicle now for almost 5 years. We've got over 85,000 kilometres on it, and I guess I'll never be going back to an internal combustion engine. I've become very enthused about not just electric vehicles, but about the intersection of electric vehicles and renewable energy systems and that sort of stuff. So today I've aimed this talk at not an expert. So I've aimed this talk at where I would have been 5 years ago with very little knowledge in this field. Okay, I've been into petrol head in my early days and always liked cars and that sort of thing, but I've changed significantly, and I'm quite enthused by what electric vehicles have to offer. So I've aimed this talk at sort of where I felt I was some time ago, and so I hope it's not too suck eggs for some people, but I think these things are important to reiterate. I like to create a discourse around this sort of stuff, and to that end I've written a small iBook which I've given you a flyer about there too. That's available on iTunes if you wanted to download it, or you can send me an email to the email address there, and I'll send you a copy of it. So let's get underway. I'll have some questions at the end, I think. But look, what I'm going to cover this afternoon, just some key aspects of EV technology, their design and their advantages, and talk a little bit about the intersection of electric vehicles and PV, so photovoltaic cells, particularly for from a residential perspective, and then we'll have some questions. So if we look at this statement, it's often attributed to Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I think that statement sort of epitomises the paradigm shift needed in going from one technology to another. And as I look at where electric vehicles are now, a lot of people are evaluating electric vehicles by the criteria by which they've evaluated the internal combustion engine. And I think we miss so much when we do that. It's like saying, I'll give you a new phone, not knowing what an iPhone can do from the old era. So I'm going to start with the horse. So if we look at the horse, that's where we get the term 1 horsepower from, which is about 0.75 kilowatts of power. And of course, the horse stores its own energy in glucose and fats and so forth in its system, but it gets that energy ultimately from the grass it eats, which comes ultimately from the sun. Coming along, we get the internal combustion engine, which has been with us now for about a bit over 100 years, I suppose, in any sort of developed and useful format. And straight away we see a big difference there, that the internal combustion engine is much, much smaller and produces a lot more power. But again, it needs to fuel itself ultimately from energy which comes from the sun, and it has no stored energy of its own. But you can see there why the internal combustion engine may have been quite attractive to early horse owners, but it did not do everything that a horse can do. So, it could not reproduce itself in the field, it could not self-feed, it could not jump fences, and so we still have horses used today in many parts of our society because they are still quite helpful. Along comes the electric motor, which has been around for as long as the internal combustion engine, might I say. and it has, you'll again look at the power comparison between that and the internal combustion engine. And that's what we call power density. So the electric motor has far, far more power density than the internal combustion engine. And that brings a number of big advantages to us. And we'll just look briefly at a couple of those things as we go forward. But before we do, have a look at that slide. So we've got a drag line and we've got a coal train. What do those two photos have in common, two images have in common? Any ideas? Apart from them being coal related. That's the obvious one.
Great big diesel power plants?
No. In fact, that's the exact opposite point I want to make. Because this thing here is actually powered by an electric motor. Okay, they're attached to the grid. You can almost see that cable going there. They're attached directly to the grid, and they chew a phenomenal amount of electricity. But they are electrically powered. And this thing here, yes, it's got a great big diesel power plant in it, but yes, but the actual drive of this is electric, as is the drive of that is electric. The electric motors are very, very powerful. This is a misconception a lot of people have had. Not only that, if we look at the next slide, and this is really the reason why you never, unless it's a small rail motor, you're never going to get a train that has direct drive from the internal combustion engine to the wheels, because you could not put a clutch in the thing big enough to take the torque needed. Does that make sense? And it's for the same reason that these things here are also electric, because there are some which are smaller ones which are internal or diesel driven, but clutches are a big problem. And this is the reason. So if we look at what we call on this graph here, we've got the revolutions of the motor along that axis, and up here we've got the torque or the twisting power of a motor. Now, if you look at the internal combustion engine here on the blue line, you'll see for it to produce a lot of power, it has to rev. And in actual fact, you know, when we're using an internal combustion engine, we have to bring it up, rev it up to make any power. That's why you need a clutch. That's why you've got to rev it to take off. It's got to create enough power by revving. And we usually try and keep that motor in its torque band, in its power range, as you might say, which is, in this instance at least, it's quite high, you know, 5,000 to 7,000 RPM. But because it has this narrow power range, we need a gearbox whereas when you look at an electric motor uses its full power and its full torque from no revs. And it sustains or maintains that power over a wide rev range. So what does that mean? Well, it means we don't need a clutch, and it means we don't need any gearbox. So when you're looking at all the electric vehicles out there, some of the home ones will still have their gearboxes in them, but all the manufactured ones do not have a gearbox or a multi-speed gearbox. They might have a single reduction gear, but they don't have a multi-speed gearbox. So that gives us a few other advantages. And one of the things is certainly lack of complexity, but savings in space. And so by looking at this here, this is a sort of powertrain from a Tesla. You'll notice it's got two motors, one in the front, one in the back, and you'll notice that there is almost no need for big radiators, big transmissions, and so on and so forth. So that creates a whole lot of design efficiencies in building an electric car, because it just creates more space in the car for the footprint of the car, if that makes sense. It also means we can run two motors, and in a lot of the performance electric cars now we're getting four motors, one per wheel. So that again creates other advantages, which I won't go into here. So relative to the internal combustion engine, electric motors, they're about 4 times more efficient. Come to that shortly. They've got superior torque characteristics. They've certainly got more usable power. They're smaller, they're lighter, they're quieter, They're certainly more reliable. They have no maintenance requirements. They can generate their own energy through regeneration. So while I run, while the motor produces torque and drives the wheels, if the wheels are driving the motor, then we're producing energy. So electric motors are also generators. And of course, directly they have no emissions. So they're pretty remarkable advantages relative to the internal combustion engine. But they've been around for 100 years, those advantages. And why hasn't the electric car taken off? Up until now, it's been mainly because of battery technology. So the batteries have been the limiting factor in the evolution of electric vehicles. But now battery technology is advancing and becoming cheaper quite significantly. So this is just the inside of an early model Leaf battery, which held about 24 kilowatt hours of energy, but for that, which is about the same as 2.7 litres of petrol, but that could travel over 100 kilometres. The internals of a Tesla Model S battery, that's a 100 kilowatt hour battery. The same energy in that as about 11 litres of petrol, but can travel over 500 kilometres. Why? It's because of the efficiency of the motors. The electric motors are far, far, far more efficient than any internal combustion engine. So, why, with this technology, why aren't people immediately buying EVs now? The issue is not a factor of the technology, it's a factor of cost. The range, and I don't think range is a factor that we're even hardly talking about now when it comes to electric cars. New electric cars, the Kona, there's one out there, new electric Kona, it's got a 450 kilometre range. I mean, that's more than what my old Subaru had. And it basically costs you nothing to drive. It's still an expensive car relative to its equivalent, but the whole of life costs are certainly a lot cheaper. Range is a function of battery capacity, or amount of energy we can store in the battery, and battery capacity is a function of cost at the moment, which is the only thing which is preventing a more rapid transition to electric vehicles. Having said that, if we look at this graph from the US Department of Energy, and there have been a number of other studies done by reputable journals and so forth around the world about the changes in battery technologies, and the two things we note there. One is that the costs have come down remarkably since about 2008, which is when the first Tesla Roadster was produced, 2008, about 10 years ago. That was $250,000 to buy one of those cars in Australia. Now, the cost of batteries has come down remarkably. Here we are here, about 2019, and we can see moving forward only a few years away, the cost is going to be significantly less again, which is going to make the cost of a new electric car significantly less. Not only that, what we call the energy density, or the amount of energy we can store in a battery, has been increasing. You can see that since the Tesla Roadster was manufactured, then the energy density has virtually doubled. That means that I can get twice the range out of a battery of the same size, in essence. And that's happened. I've got my car's nearly 5 years old. It's certainly 5-year-old technology. Cost me a lot of money, the dearest car I've ever bought. I can buy the same car now for the same price with twice the range. So it's already, we have already seen that transition happening. And that's within 5 years. It's actually quite a remarkable shift that's going on. From Bloomberg New Energy Finance, they predict that by 2024, 2022, the cost of an all-electric car will be the same as the equivalent car if you made it with an internal combustion engine. That's not far away. I bought my car, I should say, for my wife's sake, we bought our car in 2015, and so over half the cost of that car was due to the battery. 2019 we're about there. If I bought the same car now, then certainly the cost of the battery is significantly less proportionally. So this trend is very, very quick. The reduction in cost per kilowatt hour of a lithium-ion batteries now is at about 16% per year. So that means that, I guess what it does mean is the longer you hold off to buy your new electric car, the cheaper it's going to be. But having said that, I'm pleased we bought ours when we did, because we've had 5 years of free, and I mean absolutely free travel. Travelled over 85,000 kilometres so far out. So if we look at this chart here, which I put together, this just looks at or graphs out the correlation between the price of a car and its range. And so we see that this line through here plots out, or it gives the averages between costs of these vehicles here, which are all available in Australia, and their range. And of note, so the closer up to this corner we get, the more range we get per dollar. Okay, and you'll note that the two cars coming out this year, the Model 3, which is here this month, and the Hyundai Kona have the best value if you're looking at dollars for range. Okay? And so this trend is absolutely just a function of economies of scale and battery technologies moving forward. So the trend is I think it's unstoppable. I think in 5 years' time, half the population, if they're buying a new car, they'll probably be buying an electric car. Just moving on a little bit, this is a common question. Everybody who's got an electric vehicle gets asked this question. It's the wrong question. It's a question that comes from the horse era, or from the fossil fuel paradigm. Okay, and I put the picture of the phone up because one of the common responses is, well, how long does your phone take to charge? Most of us don't know, because we plug it in when it's convenient and we pick it up when we need it, and it's got adequate charging. And living with an electric car, it's the same sort of paradigm. We'll plug it in at the night time, drive off in the morning, and it's fully charged. I don't know when it stops charging, I just know it's fully charged in the morning. So for 95% of the charging, it doesn't matter. There's a YouTube clip which looks at the Model 3 and why it's going to, well, it's already disrupted the global auto industry, I think. But this fellow is an engineer, Julian Cox, and he says it just doesn't make any sense to be asking that question. He says the ability to fuel an internal combustion engine car rapidly, only it just comes from a misunderstanding of the paradigm of the electric car. I think the question perhaps should be, how quickly can it charge? Because if I'm doing a long trip in my car and I need to stop before I get to my destination to refuel, so to speak, then I want to know how many kilometres per hour I can charge that car at. And again, already their technology is there. So this is a 4-year-old Tesla charging at a Tesla supercharger station, and you'll notice that it was able to get 428 kilometres of range for every hour of charging. Okay, that's not bad. So this is I went to Sydney with my brother, who has one of these cars. We stopped at Port Macquarie as our first stop. We had lunch, we came back, the car was charged, we drove on to Sydney. We got to Sydney as quickly as you would have done in an internal combustion engine. So the issue is not how quickly it can charge, the issue is not how long does it take to charge, the issue is how quickly can it charge. But we only need to worry about that, when we're going on long trips. I love looking at this here. I mean, our normal house is 15 to 20 amps. There's a lot of current going into that car at that time. And might I say that this is old technology now, the new Porsche Taycan, which I'd assume most of us are never going to be able to afford. I'm sure I won't. It can charge it up to 350 kilowatts, which is a phenomenal rate of charging. So I think that question, a little bit like the question of range, is in this day and age almost a defunct question. So now I would like to just touch on what really rose my boat more than anything else around electric vehicles. And this is the freedom from fossil fuel locking. I'd use the term fossil fuel locking quite a bit because once you buy an internal combustion engine, you are locked in to probably paying $5,000 a year to refuel it and to maintain it. Depends on your mileage, of course, but it's just like signing a cheque that you can't get out of for $5,000 a year or thereabouts. That's what I call fossil fuel locking. Whereas when you have an electric car and you can charge it from your own rooftop, then you are really, it's quite a satisfying experience. So I'll just talk just briefly about our experience with our car. So we've got this system. So we've got 5 kilowatts of solar panels on our roof, and we've got a house which is grid connected, and we take electricity from the grid to the house, and we can export electricity from the house to the grid, and we can also charge our car from the photovoltaics via the house, so that's basically the system we've got at the moment. Looking at what we have found over the years, so we bought the car here autumn 2015. So on this graph, and I know it's very busy, but I'll give you a simplified version shortly. I've got here our quarterly accounts. I've taken this from our quarterly accounts. So the blue is what we use in our household, the green is what the car uses, and the gold is what the 5 kilowatts of photovoltaics produce in that quarter. And so you'll see here that when we first had the car was meaning that we were actually using more energy than we were able to produce. We've got a pool with a very hungry pool pump. I changed that pool pump to a solar powered pool pump here. And now the amount of energy we use for the car and for the house almost never exceeds, it did in that quarter there, autumn this year, but virtually never exceeds what we produce from the roof. So we're producing more energy from our roof to power both our house and our car. And I think that's absolutely remarkable. And this is the thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. And I think this is an even more potent, meaningful insight than anything around electric cars in isolation. What I've done here is just averaged out our solar production against our house and car energy requirements over the last 2 years, and we've travelled about 20,000 kilometres per year. So by looking at that, you'd say, oh well, we're producing more energy. Why don't we put on a battery so we don't have to be grid connected at all? But that belies an issue, and that is that if I go off grid altogether, then I do need a big enough battery to sustain myself for a week or 2 weeks where we get very little solar radiation. So solar panels, they'll produce electricity even in rain, but very little, okay? My solar pool pump, it still runs when it's raining, but very slowly. So this is not, going off grid, I don't think is necessarily a wise thing and not necessarily a smart thing, currently speaking. As I say, this is the system we've got. And this is the system a lot of people look at, whereby
they put on a battery and they can charge their car from the battery. The energy can flow both ways from the house to the battery and vice versa. But as I say, if you want to go off grid, you need a battery big enough to be able to sustain you for a week or two. That's not easy. That's expensive. I shouldn't say not easy, but it's an expensive way to go. The grid becomes a nice insurance policy, if you like, in that sense, even though you might not be drawing from it too much. Does anybody know what this is? I'm probably asking a bit of a benign question. Okay, so this device here is like a charger that you can buy now when you buy your Nissan Leaf. It costs you quite a bit more. And they've been using them in Japan for quite a while. It's particularly helpful for the Japanese when with the Fukushima incident, and they had lots and lots of brownouts. People would buy a Nissan Leaf. I think it was 10 or 15%, it might actually be more, don't quote me on that, but a lot of people who bought a Nissan Leaf bought what they call a leaf-to-home charger, or it's bi-directional charging. That means that I can plug my car in and I can charge the car from the grid, or if the grid is down, I can take energy from that car and feed it back into my house to run my house. So bi-directional charging, Nissan call it a leaf-to-home, or vehicle to grid is what it's often otherwise called. Now you can purchase these things already. This is technology that's already there. And why is this significant? Well, we know that car batteries, that's a very early model Nissan Leaf, it's about 2011 or 12 model. It's got a 24 kilowatt hour battery in it. Most people will not use that amount of electricity in a day in their home. Some people might, most people won't. If I had a Tesla, I've got a 100 kilowatt hour battery. You know, that gives me enough energy to run my house for 4 or 5 days. So why is that significant? Well, instead of this system here, we can actually, with leaf to home, I can actually have a relatively small ancillary battery on my house. And this works well most of the time. However, if the sun doesn't shine enough, I can take my car to a fast charger, I can charge it up in an hour, I can bring it home and use that to power my house, which then makes it very easy to disconnect from the grid if I so chose. And I think this is another one of the remarkable evolutions of the electric car. So the electric car becomes like your old mower can. You take it down to the service station, fill it up with energy, you bring it home and fill your mower. The electric car, particularly if you've got a big battery, and if you're going to buy an electric car, there are a couple of really good reasons to buy the car with the largest battery you can afford. When you've got an electric car, you've actually got a very portable energy source. So does that make sense? We can just keep going back and forth, filling our home storage battery as we need if the sun doesn't shine. But most of the time the sun's shining and providing quite adequately for our car and our residence. I'll just take this quote from a fellow online, Peter Norby. Your roof is your fuel station and sunshine is your fuel. Just stop and think about that for a moment. I think that is remarkable. Okay? You can produce enough energy for your house and your home from your rooftop generally. Never before has it been possible for homeowners to generate their own clean, emissions-free energy to power both home and cars that is less expensive than, more efficient than, and more convenient than fossil fuels. And that is a remarkable evolution in my terms. One of the things about fossil fuels is that they need economies of scale to be cost effective, and I've termed this word stupid energy pathway. So if you People look at the CO2 emissions from their cars. Most people won't know what the CO2 emissions are from their cars, but they think that's the only cost. But you've got to look at the whole energy pathway to get that fuel to your car is also emissions intensive and dollar intensive. So there's the sourcing of it, there's the transport of it, there's the refining of it, and what a lot of people don't realise is the refining fuel takes a lot of electricity and is usually sought from coal-fired power, so there are pollution costs there as well. And then there's the transport again, and then you've got to sit and wait to line up to fuel your car, then you've got to line up to pay, and then there are the emissions which actually come from the exhaust of that vehicle as well. So all the way through that pathway are emissions and are costs involved. And when you compare that to what I would call a smart energy pathway, then this is clearly the future. Not just on emissions grounds, on practicalities and on cost grounds. And the costs are continuing to fall. Just a couple of things before concluding and taking any questions if you like. I thought I'd put this in. This is a definition from the fellow who coined the term disruptive innovation. And we've all heard of disruptive innovation these days, and different technologies disrupt old business models and so forth. So this fellow, Clayton Christensen, said that a disruptive innovation is a phenomenon by which an innovation transforms an existing market or sector by introducing four things: simplicity, convenience, accessibility, and affordability, where complication and high costs are the status quo. Initially, a disruptive innovation is formed in a niche market that may appear unattractive or inconsequential to industry incumbents, but eventually the new product or idea completely redefines the industry. And if you look at the electric car relative to the internal combustion engine, it brings simplicity, it brings convenience, it brings accessibility, and very well, I would argue now that it is, over the life of the car, it's more affordable. The initial upfront cost is still a hurdle for a lot of people, and I get that. But it is, within 5 years, it will be just as affordable as an internal combustion engine as well, which can't really reduce in cost anymore because I've already taken advantage of the economies of scale, which the electric car is yet to do. So I'm very optimistic about the future when it comes to this sort of technology. One of my big motives is I've got 4 grandchildren now, and I'm really concerned for the future that we leave to them. I have been a great polluter over my time. I've enjoyed internal combustion engine cars and drag racing and all sorts of great fun without having to pay the cost. Now I'm sort of to the point where I'm feeling I need to give back a little bit. So look, thank you for your time. I love this quote from Gandhi: "You must be the change you want to see in the world." And I find that the more I try to live to those values that are important to me, at least, the more satisfaction and fulfilment I find. And this is just a little book that I've written, so you can download that on iTunes if you like. It's free, or those flyers I've given out have my email address, so you can send me an email, and I'm happy to give you a Dropbox link to the PDF version. So